People used to treat me like I was nothing, a specter in a world that barely glanced my way. At 16, flying solo in first class from Atlanta to London, I found myself wedged between luxury and condescension, poised to confront the ugliest truths about privilege and prejudice. The flight attendant Diane sized me up with a sneer, her disdain palpable. I remembered my father's words, "Ignore the small-minded, they'll reveal themselves soon enough." Yet amidst the plush seats and muffled laughter, I thought I could escape the storm brewing in her eyes. But then came the barrage of her questions, each one steeped in the unspoken belief that someone like me didn't belong in her world. Diane's subtle discrimination morphed into agony when, with a clumsy flourish, she spilled scalding coffee on my lap. Pain shot through me, and the gasps of fellow passengers pushed a wave of humiliation over me. I wasn't just burning, I was being belittled, stripped of my dignity before witnesses who had known me for mere seconds. Yet in that moment of chaos, Casey, another attendant, acknowledged my struggle, offering a glimmer of understanding. As I resolved to tell my father's chief of staff, I felt a strange surge of power. This was no longer about a spilled drink. It was about justice. By the time we landed, the truth of my identity, a black girl, yes, but also the daughter of the airline's owner, would turn the tide. And in the aftermath, I'd find solace in the changes my father vowed to enact, a bittersweet redemption born from pain and prejudice, assuring me that no one could write my story but me. "Is this your seat?" Diane's voice dripped with skepticism as she planted herself firmly next to Amamira. "I hope you have your ticket." Amamira glanced up from her sketchbook, a pang of irritation twisting in her chest. "Yes, I do." "Right here," she replied, her tone steady, though her heartbeat raced. Diane's eyes narrowed, a dismissive smile curving her lips. "I thought first class was for people who actually—" She paused, glancing pointedly at a group of older white men seated nearby, laughing loudly. "Appreciate finer things." Amamira clenched her jaw, forcing herself to return to her art. But Diane was relentless. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "No, thank you," Amamira said, still focused on her sketch. Diane shrugged, the corners of her mouth twitching, as if she couldn't resist her duty. "I think you should really try it. It might do you some good to loosen up." She poured the scalding liquid with a practiced flip, only for it to cascade onto Amamira's lap. "Ah, what the hell?" Amamira shouted, jumping up, her hands instinctively grabbing her burned thigh. Disinterested response, her face devoid of real concern. To nearby passenger gasped, "Are you all right?" Amamira took a deep breath, stifling the tears that threatened to spill. The humiliation clawed at her chest as an unfamiliar weight settled in. It was more than just the burn. "You're just playing the victim," Diane smirked, making her way to the front as if to belittle Amamira's pain. "Believe me, this isn't over." Amamira whispered to herself, her father's connections echoing in the back of her mind. The laughter of the men surrounding her stung as she felt the weight of her identity in that moment, caught between hurt and fury. The cabin shuddered with the hum of engines and muted conversations, but all Amamira Langston felt was the weight of an icy stare. Diane, the flight attendant, swayed down the aisle, her smile brittle. "What would you like?" she asked, tone syrupy, yet laced with skepticism. Amamira hesitated, caught in the web of Diane's condescension. "Just water, please," she murmured. But Diane chuckled softly, looking over at the burly men enjoying their whiskey and cigars. Every interaction felt like a subtle jab. The way Diane offered her coffee, her eyes roving over Amamira's braids, judging, always judging. Amamira's heart raced, the humiliation gnawing at her as she tried to lose herself in her sketchbook, the lines on the page blurring with the fullness of her frustration. The wariness of the other passengers only amplified her isolation. Their silence was a canvas for her shame. "Here you go," Diane said a bit too cheerily, the cup wobbling precariously in her grip. Then, without warning, the cup tipped. Scalding liquid splashed against Amamira's lap. Fire erupted through her veins as an expletive escaped her, the hum of the cabin dissipating into shocked gasps. Diane's fumbled apologies barely reached her ears over the pulse in her head. Amamira stood, still reeling from both pain and anger. She caught Diane's bewildered expression. Briefly, emotion flickered there. Regret? But then it was gone. She turned away, heart pounding, the quiet storm inside her brewing. This was it. Kanama Mira took a deep breath, the sting of the spilled coffee still fresh on her skin. She looked at Diane, the flight attendant's smirk wavering under the weight of the moment. "You think I'm just some kid in your way?" she said, her voice steady but firm. Diane's eyes flickered with surprise, the confidence in Amamira's tone slicing through the air like a knife. That was an accident," Diane responded weakly, her bravado crumbling. Amamira straightened her back, grounding herself in the authority her father had always encouraged her to claim. "You made a choice to underestimate me. That's on you." She spotted Dr. Morris giving a subtle nod of approval from his seat. As the plane touched down, Amamira pulled out her phone, heart racing. "Dad, I need to talk to you as soon as we land." The urgency in her voice surprised even her. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern lacing his words. "Not really, but I'm handling it." She ignored the painful sensation in her lap, focusing on the warmth of her resolve. This wasn't just about coffee, it was about respect. When the officials met her at the gate, she felt a surge of power. "There will be consequences for how I was treated," she stated, voice low but resolute. Diane's posture sagged as awareness settled in. Maybe she hadn't expected a young girl to fight back, but Amamira was no ordinary teen. Small victories piled upon each other like building blocks, signaling a changing tide in her world, one where she wouldn't remain silent. Amamira sat quietly in first class. The world outside blurred into a hum of clouds and sky, but inside, tension crackled like static electricity. Diane, the flight attendant, approached with her stiff smile, exuding an air of superiority. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Amamira offered a polite smile, her sketchbook open, the charcoal still fresh from a world that felt apart from this confrontation. Commentarios, as the flight progressed, Diane's gaze honed in on Amamira, measuring her worthiness against the older white men around her. Each dismissive glance was a needle in her chest. Amamira inhaled deeply, recalling her father's words, "Small minds can't touch your spirit." But as coffee splashed across her lap, pain searing her skin, the air shifted. Gasps erupted from the passengers, a mix of shock and disbelief. Amamira held back tears, boiling beneath the surface as Diane cursed under her breath, scrambling to clean up the mess she created. The contrast was stark, Amamira's quiet dignity against Diane's rising panic. The humiliation seeped into Diane's demeanor as Dr. Morris, a fellow passenger, spoke out. "You need to apologize," he urged, anger framing his words. Diane's face flushed crimson, denial gripping her tight. As Amamira was escorted away for assistance, whispers flew through first class like wildfire. And then the moment unfolded. Amamira discreetly texted her father's chief of staff, their connection a radiant beacon of justice in the storm. Diane's eyes widened when she noticed officials waiting at the gate. Reality began to unravel, a reflection of her prejudice laid bare. Days later, in a sterile conference room, evidence against Diane piled high, as Amamira's identity reverberated through the airline's hierarchy. "She's the owner's daughter?" The shock in the room was palpable. As whispers filled the air, Amamira held her head high, an unshakable calm in her heart. Came swiftly, a pink slip served cold, her reputation crumbling like the coffee cup that once symbolized her disdain. In contrast, Amamira's father announced new reforms, a celebratory nod to his daughter's resilience. The program, Langston Empowerment Initiatives, became a tribute to a moment of silent strength. As the plane touched down, the world felt different. Justice wasn't loud. It was the quiet transformation of a girl wronged. And as a new chapter began, the remnants of prejudice faded, replaced by hope and the promise of accountability. As the flight came to an end, I found myself sitting in that temporary limbo of realization and relief. What had begun as a routine trip transformed into a reflection of the tangled web of privilege and prejudice. I remember the chill of the coffee spilling over my lap, the burning sting pulling me sharply into the reality of being treated like I was less than I was. It's easy to say I handled it well now, but I felt small and powerless in that moment. Yet, I learned something profound. Sometimes the eyes of the world can be cruel, but they can also shine a light on injustice. With my father's support, I navigated through the murky waters of bias and came out on the other side, wiser and more resolute. Still, I can't shake the question lingering in my mind. Far in seeking accountability for Diane's actions, I invite you to share your thoughts. Have you ever faced disrespect or dismissal? How did you respond? Let's engage in a dialogue about our experiences with power and justice. Your voice matters. Comment below, and let's share our stories together.